We're continuing our conversation about the potential end to the war in Ukraine. Now, the worldview, according to President Donald Trump, is clearly different from his predecessor, Joe Biden. He is leaning into his ability to have conversations with President Vladimir Putin to try to end this senseless fighting in Ukraine. It is worth noting that Trump and Putin spoke for over an hour on Wednesday, while former President Biden, as I pointed out in my radar, had not spoken to the Russian leader in 3 or 4 years.
Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky clearly knows which way the winds of war are blowing. Simply put, if the U.S. withdraws support for Ukraine, Europe would not be able to fill the gap. Zelensky told the Guardian newspaper on Tuesday, quote, "There are voices which say that Europe could offer security guarantees without the Americans, and I always say no. Security guarantees without America are not real security guarantees." Reuters also quoted him as saying, "We, as a sovereign country, simply will not be able to accept any agreements without us."
So what is next? Here to unpack it all is retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. Thanks so much for coming back to Rising.
Always a pleasure to be here, Robbie.
You were the first person I wanted to speak to after news broke yesterday that Donald Trump announced he had talked to Putin about a potential end to this war and would speak to Zelensky as well. Sounds to me like the deal they are working toward, one where Ukraine does not join NATO. Russia, unfortunately, keeps the territory it gained, but there's a guarantee of security for the rest of Ukraine, protection from Europe, that Russia can go no further. Is that ideal? Maybe not, but in reality, maybe the best thing that can possibly happen. Sounds very much along the lines that you and I have discussed on this show for years? What do you think?
Years, so yeah, plural, yeah, from the beginning. We have talked about that. Though I would say people, even those in the Trump camp, need to be very careful about these comments about keeping a security guarantee for Ukraine, because they're asking for that, have been from the beginning. I'm not sure any nation on the planet, most least of all the United States, is going to put their security on the line to guarantee Ukraine's security. So I think that we need to look into the details a little bit about what people even think they mean when they say security guarantees, because frankly, there aren't any going to come, and the faster we recognize that reality as well, the quicker we're going to be able to get this to an end. Now, that is not to say that a negotiated settlement isn't possible, because it definitely is. The Russians have been signaling this literally from before the war and at every stage since that time, but it's going to have to be on something close to the terms they set. And here's the reason why, Robbie. They have the military capacity. If they don't get a deal they want in negotiations, they can simply keep fighting until they gain everything by force of arms that they want.
And indeed, that could very well be the case. Now, of course, the implicit guarantee of security could be the incentive. If we certainly don't want U.S. troops on the ground there. There's got to be a limit to how much more money we possibly could give them. But if it's just, an understanding that Europe would step in if Russia went any further, so they know that, so they're not going to. So it's kind of like a mutual backing off. I think that would be okay.
Well, and you had Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth yesterday expressly say two of those very things you just mentioned here. There will be no American troops involved in any of this, and the Europeans themselves are going to have to pick up the lion's share of any kind of support going forward. Now, the good news is, and that's why I say it depends on how you define security guarantees. The good news is that their aim has been from the beginning that there will be no NATO on their western border in Ukraine or anywhere else. So they don't have any incentive to, for example, conquer all of Ukraine. Then they're right up on the border with NATO and all of the NATO countries that currently exist. So they don't want that. What they want is a buffer between. They don't want, as has been comically claimed almost from the beginning by so many Western leaders, that Russia wants to reestablish the USSR and they want to go and conquer everybody. They don't want that. They want security on their border. If they can get it through negotiations, then that will provide guarantees, in a sense, security for the remainder of Ukraine, because Russia wants an independent Ukraine on its border between them and NATO. So as long as we understand how both sides define security, then we'll come faster to making a negotiated deal.
Lieutenant Colonel, thank you so much for being here with us. The only thing I don't understand about what you're saying is that we are theoretically here to honor Putin's desire for security, but somehow not particularly honor Zelensky's desire for security. I mean, if we actually look at the pattern of Putin's behavior, he goes, he takes what he wants, he comes back, and then he waits a while. And all that we're getting here is his promise. When actually, if you look at his pattern, it's reasonable to assume that he just might go take some more when he wants to. So I don't understand why it is that as Americans we're supposed to just assume that his promise is good enough and concern ourselves so much with understanding his security concerns and not the Ukrainians.
Yeah, two things. Number one, I would never advocate trusting Putin anywhere, not 1 inch anything, and there's no need to. We shouldn't take him at his word, but we have a powerful NATO on the border there, and as long as there's the Russian security has been established, and that's the key thing here. We're at a point, and I do want to make this point. It doesn't really matter what any of us think or want. It only matters what the balance of power between the two sides is, because war doesn't know anything about morality or what ought to be, et cetera. It only knows what is. And right now, the fact is that Russia has the balance of power irrevocably on its side. So if we don't acknowledge that, then we're not going to find a settlement that can at least be tolerable to the West and certainly to what's going to be remaining of Ukraine. But the second thing is that it is important to understand Russia has never said they want to conquer everything in Ukraine or to the West. They have always said they want security on their western border. And if we don't acknowledge what their security needs are, as well as what European security needs are, then we're never going to find an end. And that's why I say, if we don't acknowledge those realities, then eventually Putin can take it now all the way to the Dnieper River and possibly even into western Ukraine if it goes that far.
So many people, many Democrats, smearing those who are contemplating this deal as Putin puppets, saying that it's wrong to already agree to not permit Ukraine to join NATO without still negotiating that further or having that be, a bargaining chip to use later. To I guess steelman that argument, or I guess allow you the chance to address it.
Sure.
Why is that misguided? That, well, even if we are going to make a deal, we shouldn't have committed already to say, yeah, they're not going to join NATO. We should have held out for more.
Well, yeah, and you see that being played out right now. Just a couple of hours ago, in the British press, Ben Wallace, former defense secretary, actually accused Secretary Hegseth of betraying Ukraine. Like you're basically handing over the keys. Just about what you're saying right there. Here's the problem with he is exposing Wallace is what the entire West, and you can go to Keir Starmer, you can go to Joe Biden, you can go to former Secretary of State Blinken, et cetera. All these, they have always said Ukraine is going to win. Ukraine is going to succeed. You've had retired general officers tell you that their 2023 offensive was going to succeed, and for all these reasons, and all of it was wrong. It was always wrong. And in my view, by refusing to make a deal with Russia before the war started in December 2021, by refusing to have an obvious, easy negotiated settlement that could have ended the war less than 2 months in April 2021 in 22 in Istanbul, they just said, no, we're going to keep fighting. And the result has been as predictable as it can. I've been on your show ever since this war started, telling you exactly how the military was going to work out, and it has. So you have these people who are making the claims that you just argued, saying that we should give up, but they're oblivious to the wreckage that has resulted. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian people are dead today because no one in the West would acknowledge basic balance of power dynamics and how wars are fought. And if the Trump administration appears that they're not going to follow that path and that they are going to try to get this over, if they don't, and if they continue following what the Ben Wallaces want to do, then you're going to see probably hundreds of thousands of more Ukrainian people die before this finally comes to an end.
Indeed. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you so much for coming with us to give your take on the news. We appreciate
Always a
it.
pleasure, Robbie. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Definitely wasn't your run-of-the-mill congressional hearing. We'll show you some of the highlights next from the Doge hearing. Stay tuned.